From casseroles to Paprikash, Grandma always knew how to give new life to boring ground beef. Her dishes were always spot on, ready to give you the time of your life at lunch. Allow me to let you in on her cooking secrets. The classic beef and potato casserole. Reminds me of a time when 40-step recipes from Instagram didn't exist, and it was all about simplicity and comfort. The layers of browned ground beef, golden potatoes, and a creamy sauce could warm even the coldest hearts. Topped with a generous amount of cheese, of course, because when you're at Grandma's, more cheese equals more love. Why was this dish suddenly forgotten? Maybe it's because all of the new recipes call for superfoods and gluten-free alternatives, which this casserole is definitely not. It's a classic, old-school ground beef dish. The magic of beef and potato casserole lies in its simplicity. It's basically just a few staple ingredients thrown together and baked until bubbly. No fuss. It's hearty and delicious. Plus, who doesn't love a meal where everything is combined into one pan? Less cleanup means more time in front of the TV watching your favorite 80s sitcom. Seconds are almost always guaranteed, so you could also say that this dish is perfect for meal stretches and it's budget-friendly. No stories. Don't confuse regular old boring meatloaf with this special Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. No, don't get your wires crossed, it's definitely different. Back in the day, Grandma really knew how to jazz things up and make this classic into something unexpected, just by adding some crackers. When crackers are added to the mix, they become like little sponges full of flavor, absorbing juices and adding to the texture of the dish. But this still doesn't really make it that different from the regular meatloaf. So where does the difference lie? Well, it lies in the Dutch oven baking. This oven, or pot as some might say, locks in flavor and moisture like nothing you've ever seen before. The result? A tender, savory meatloaf with a perfectly crisp outer layer. And Grandma knew how to serve it right, with a thick layer of ketchup glaze on top. Because sometimes, more is more. Plus, when you add a side of mashed potatoes, it'll be like you're biting into nostalgia. Back in the Great Depression, meatloaf was a go-to because it stretched a small amount of beef into a meal for the whole family. And crackers were cheaper than breadcrumbs, and we all know Grandma knows how to save some bucks. I know some of you aren't fond of soupy dishes, but please hear me out. Beef paprikash. It sounds complicated to make, but I know your grandma, just like mine, made it without batting an eye. Imagine tender beef simmered in a rich paprika-infused sauce, bursting with smoky and spicy flavors. This dish is like goulash's cousin, wouldn't you say? Beef paprikash is a traditional Hungarian dish where it was a hit in kitchens where spices were basically like family heirlooms. But, contrary to popular beliefs here in the United States, paprikash is traditionally made without beef or macaroni noodles. Shocking, right? Its origins date back to the 9th century Magyar shepherds as a simple meat and onion stew prepared in heavy iron kettles known as bograks. In the 15th century, invading Ottoman Turks introduced a new spice to Hungary, paprika. While the rest of Europe remained lukewarm towards this red chili pepper from the New World, Hungary embraced it, and paprika has since become a defining element of Hungarian cuisine. Paprikash is kind of in between a soup and a stew. Unlike some stews, paprikash is not overly packed full of beef and vegetables. It is a little more brothy. But through the cooking process, the broth becomes a little thicker and very rich in flavor. And here's another fun fact for you. Paprika is actually made from dried bell peppers and has been around since the 16th century. And if you thought paprika was just for sprinkling on deviled eggs, think again. Now, another dish that originated from Europe, stuffed Col Robie. This traditional Hungarian dish features bulbs of Col Robie stuffed with a flavorful pork and rice filling and served alongside a Col Robie soup made with leftover scraps and greens. I know it doesn't sound very appealing, but if you're adventurous, it's worth a shot. But what is Col Robie? Popular in Northern and Eastern Europe, Col Robie is sometimes called a German turnip. Col Robie may look like an alien creature, but if you've never tried it, you're in for a treat. It has a texture similar to broccoli, but it's sweeter and not quite as smelly. Stuffed Col Robie is a very traditional Hungarian dish, but there's no one single way to make it. Much like Italians and their marinara, every family will have their own different version of it, with different meats. Some feature beef instead of pork, or a mix of the two, as well as many different stuffings and seasonings. But this one is particularly unique in that it uses all vegetables, including greens. It makes its own side dish by pureeing the greens and leftover pulp from the hollowed-out bulbs into a gorgeously green, flavorful soup. Brilliant, right? Imagine a cake recipe that makes its own frosting or something. That would be sick, am I right? Or am I right? Col Robie has a mild, slightly sweet flavor, kind of like a cross between a cabbage and a turnip. Once stuffed, these little guys were baked until tender, with the beefy filling bubbling away inside. If your grandma was making Col Robie, just know that she was way ahead of her time, since it can perfectly fit into today's low-carb keto lifestyle. Shepherd's pie, the cozy blanket of food. This classic comfort food originated with the clever idea of layering leftover ground beef with mashed potatoes. Shepherd's pie is believed to have been invented in the early 1800s. During this time, housewives were struggling to find innovative ways to recycle the leftovers that their husbands and kids had turned up their noses at. Now, buckle up for a brief history lesson. The British and some of the Protestant Irish converts became the new rulers, while Irish Catholics who refused to convert became peasant farm workers living in humble homes referred to as cottages. Around 1589, Sir Walter Raleigh introduced potato farming to Ireland, and over time, potatoes gained acceptance in Ireland since they were not only delicious, but also affordable for the poor. Towards the end of the 18th century, a new dish known as cottage pie came about. It is believed that it originated as a way for women to make use of the leftovers to avoid food wastage. After making the delicious weekend roast, all unused meat was carefully repurposed into a pie using affordable potatoes as a crust. Shepherd's pie became one of the best ways to deal with leftover meat. As an added bonus, it was, and still is, extremely delicious. Moving on to something that is American-made, Salsberry Steak, seasoned ground beef patties, pan-seared to perfection, and then smothered in a rich onion-loaded gravy. What's not to like? I bet most of you haven't heard the backstory of Salsberry Steak, so let me educate you. It is best known as a staple of TV dinners and bargain buffets. The Salsberry steak actually has its beginnings as a proposed cure for digestive illness during the Civil War. If you didn't know, digestive illnesses killed more soldiers during the Civil War than combat did, and a diet rich in beefsteak and coffee was one suggested cure. The inventor of the Salsberry steak, Dr. James Henry Salsbury, was an early pioneer of germ theory and of diet being a factor in health. While some of his ideas may be outdated today, his affection for beefsteak and his promotion of its positive effect on health have persisted. While patties of ground beef are common fare, the Salsberry steak was cemented in the American lexicon during World War I. In many English-speaking countries, there was a movement to limit the use of German-sounding words, so the Army served Salsberry steak rather than Hamburg steak and Liberty sandwiches instead of hamburgers. Sure, it may not be the health trend it once was, but let's be honest, it's a comfort food icon for a reason. Johnny Maretti might just be the ultimate comfort food you've been missing out on. It's an old-school casserole that was once a staple in Midwestern kitchens, but has since fallen off the radar for many. Imagine this: a bubbling, cheesy dish of noodles, tender ground beef, and zesty tomato sauce, all baked together in a warm, gooey hug. It's basically the casserole version of a cozy sweater on a chilly day. This dish has an interesting backstory. Created in the early 1900s at Maretti's restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, it was named after the brother of the restaurant's owner, Teresa Maretti. Word has it that Johnny Maretti became so popular, it spread like wildfire across homes, schools, and church potlucks throughout the Midwest. It was affordable, easy to make, and could feed a crowd. What's not to love? What makes Johnny Maretti so special is how adaptable it is. Want to throw in some veggies like peppers or mushrooms? Go for it. Craving a little extra kick? Add some crushed red pepper or Italian seasoning. And if you're a cheese lover, and who isn't, feel free to go overboard with layers of mozzarella, cheddar, or parmesan. The best part? It tastes even better the next day as leftovers when all the flavors have had time to mingle and marry. Cabbage rolls are one of those dishes that instantly make my heart melt. It reminds me of my childhood and weekends away at Grandma's, with the house reeking of cabbage, but nobody minded. Cabbage rolls are proof that Grandma could take a humble vegetable and turn it into something magical. Picture this: tender cabbage leaves wrapped around a savory filling of seasoned ground beef and rice. Once baked, the cabbage turned silky, and each bite was an explosion of comforting flavors. And the best part? Cabbage rolls were even better the next day. But this dish has its variations all around the world. Although the direct heritage of cabbage rolls cannot be certain, its lineage can be traced back to Jewish cooking 2,000 years ago. Here are a few variations, and hopefully some of them will get you to try cabbage rolls, if you haven't already. In Bulgaria, it's called sarmi, made with veal, pork, chopped mint, sweet paprika, and yogurt. And in Russia, it's called golubtsi. The Russian version of cabbage rolls usually consists of cooked meatballs wrapped in cabbage leaves. Rice is commonly added to the stuffing as well, but stuffing the rolls with rice only is rare, generally served with sour cream. But whichever version of cabbage rolls you decide to try, you won't be sorry. Now, to trace back to the all-American dishes. Next up, Sloppy Joe's. If there's one ground beef dish that screams childhood, it's Sloppy Joe's. The magic started with browning the beef, then stirring in a tangy, slightly sweet sauce made of ketchup, mustard, and maybe a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Spooned onto a soft, squishy bun, the result was a messy masterpiece that made you glad napkins were invented. The concept of mixing meat, cheese, and bread is so simple that it shouldn't come as a surprise that it became an American favorite. The Sloppy Joe's history is a bit complex, though. Some say that the original Sloppy Joe came from a cafe in Sioux City, Iowa, where many years ago, in 1930, a cook named Joe added tomato sauce to his loose meat sandwiches. And voila, a new recipe was invented. Others say that the original sandwich was born at the iconic restaurant in Key West, Florida, Sloppy Joe's Bar. But wherever it originated from, the loose meat sandwiches are still very much a culinary tradition, especially in Iowa. Another staple of our United States cuisine, beef and bean chili. Ooh, my grandma knew how to make that chili right. This wasn't the watery, mild stuff you might get from a can. No, this was a thick, hearty, beef and bean-packed chili that stuck to your ribs and made you forget about the cold weather outside. Ground beef, kidney beans, tomatoes, and a fiery blend of spices. Grandma's secret weapon was always a dash of chili powder and maybe a little cocoa powder if she was feeling fancy. Simmered to perfection, the rich, meaty sauce soaked into every bite. And the beans? Well, they weren't just filler. They added a creamy texture that balanced the beefy goodness. Whether served with cornbread, crackers, or just a dollop of sour cream on top, Grandma's chili could warm even the coldest of souls. Now, you might have noticed how I'm trying to avoid mentioning the origins of chili. And if you're from the south of the United States, you probably know why. Chili has roots in the American Southwest, but variations can be found all over the country. Some swear by no beans, which may come as a shocker, I know, but at Grandma's beans were a must. They made the chili stretch further, which meant more leftovers, because the only thing better than chili is day-old chili. Beef and macaroni skillet. Now that's a one-pot wonder. The combination of ground beef, tender macaroni, and a tangy tomato sauce would be a hit with everyone at the table. The best part about macaroni skillet is that it only takes one pot to make, which leaves more time for desserts and less dishwashing. And who doesn't love that? This dish was basically Hamburger Helper before Hamburger Helper existed, but way better because it was homemade, or rather, Grandma made. She'd brown the beef, stir in some garlic and onions, and maybe sneak in a few veggies, then toss in elbow macaroni and let it all simmer together. The noodles absorbed the rich flavors from the beef and sauce, creating a saucy, cheesy, beefy pasta dish that could make anyone happy after a long day. This dish became a staple during World War II, when rationing meant you had to get creative with minimal ingredients. But the homemade version definitely doesn't lack any ingredients. It's rich in flavor, and if I'm being honest, it's not totally cheap to prepare. Porcupine meatballs were a staple during the Great Depression, but they've managed to stick around since then. Meat, even something as mundane as ground beef, was expensive, and home cooks used innovation and imaginative ways to make a small amount of protein stretch to feed a large and hungry family. Porcupine meatballs were one of the answers to the problem. And while they may sound exotic, don't worry, no porcupines are being harmed. These little meatballs get their name from the way uncooked rice pokes out of them during cooking, making them look like they're covered in tiny spikes. But don't worry, the spikes won't hurt you while eating. They're soft, tender, and full of flavor. This dish, with its rich tomato sauce, was perfect for serving over mashed potatoes or rice. There are a few alternatives to the old-school, classic porcupine meatballs. Like, for example, there are the Italian porcupine meatballs, which call for veggies, and brown rice, which is whole grain. So these meatballs were spiking with that nutritional value. Pun intended. Taco pie or Frito pie is a popular dish in the Midwestern, Southeastern, and Southwestern United States. Ground beef seasoned with taco spices, a crispy tortilla or crescent roll crust, melty cheese, and layers of refried beans or salsa. It's like all of the best parts of a taco, turned into a pie. The oldest known recipe using Frito's brand corn chips with chili was published in Texas in 1949. The recipe may have been invented by Daisy Doolin, the mother of Frito Company founder Charles Elmer Doolin, and the first person to use Fritos as an ingredient in cooking. And here's a little fun fact for you. Charles Doolin and his Frito Company were early investors in Disneyland, which opened Casa de Fritos restaurant in Disneyland in 1955. Frito chili pie appears on the 1950s menu. Another story claims that true Frito pie originated only in the 1960s with Teresa Hernandez, who worked at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her Frito pie used homemade red chili con carne with cheddar cheese and onions and was served in a bag. Talk about being laid back. Hamburger soup. I can imagine you staring at the screen in confusion, like what even is that? Well, it's ground beef, veggies, and a rich broth all simmered together to create the ultimate cold weather comfort food. It was like having a burger and fries, except in liquid form, and you didn't have to fire up the grill. The secret to making it taste amazing was letting the ground beef soak up all those savory flavors from the broth, carrots, onions, and celery. And if you toss in a handful of barley or pasta, you could bulk it up, and a splash of tomato sauce or diced tomatoes add the perfect tangy kick. And let's be real, the leftovers tasted even better the next day. Hamburger soup was a thrifty way to stretch a pound of beef into multiple servings, perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. Plus, it's infinitely customizable. Grandma probably tossed in whatever veggies she had on hand because she wasn't about wasting anything. Plus, we all know that veggies taste better once they are mixed with meat. Beef and noodle casserole. Ground beef, noodles, and a creamy sauce, all baked together until bubbly and golden. The preparation is pretty standard. Start by browning the beef with onions and garlic, then stirring in a sauce that is equal parts rich and comforting. Sour cream, cream of mushroom soup, or maybe a little cheese could go a long way here. Then the noodles come into play, perfectly cooked and ready to soak up all that creamy goodness. Topped with a crunchy breadcrumb or cheese layer, this casserole came out of the oven with a golden crust that was impossible to resist. This type of casserole became wildly popular in the 1950s when prepackaged foods and canned soups made dinner prep easier. But prepackaged food at Grandma's? You would never catch her lacking like that. Never. Everything is homemade and made with lots and lots of love. And, let's not kid ourselves, those prepackaged casseroles can't even come close to the real deal. Beef tamale pie. The tamale is a traditional Mexican dish that dates back to the days of the Aztecs. It is a dough made of masa that is usually stuffed with sweet or savory fillings and then steamed or boiled in a corn husk. Imagine seasoned ground beef, corn, and cheese, all baked under a blanket of cornbread or mesa dough. The early tamale pie was a simple dish made with beef and a chili sauce that was sandwiched between two layers of cornmeal mush. However, as this dish entered the mid-century with its more is better mentality, other meats could be used as well as other ingredients added such as corn, olives, green peppers, or cheese. We don't know for sure who was the creative mind that brought to us this amazing dish, but we can probably assume that it was somebody, possibly from Texas, Mexico, or even California. The earliest recipe for tamale pie was in a 1908 newspaper where the recipe won the creator's second prize in a contest. Early versions of the recipe could also be called tamale loaf. This was definitely a dish that originated in the Southwest. Tamale pie was a recipe that has been used during times of budgeting and conserving. It seems like the recipe gained national attention when it was touted as a great way for meat conservation during World War I. Again, the meal was given props in the 1930s for being cheap, which was a concern during the Great Depression. Old-fashioned beef hash. Old-fashioned beef hash was Grandma's joker card when she had leftovers, and boy, did she know how to make it shine. Leftover ground beef? No problem. Toss it in a skillet with some diced potatoes, onions, and whatever veggies were lying around, and you have a dish that was more than the sum of its parts. It was crispy, savory, and so satisfying that it became a go-to breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The best part of hash? Those crispy bits. Grandma would cook the potatoes and beef until they formed a perfect golden brown crust on the bottom of the skillet. With a dash of Worcestershire sauce, maybe a sprinkle of fresh herbs, and sometimes a fried egg on top, beef hash turned simple ingredients into something you couldn't wait to dig into. And here are some facts for you. Beef hash has roots going back to colonial America, where thrifty cooks used it to make the most of their leftovers. In fact, the word hash comes from the French hacher, meaning to chop. It's important to know your facts, and I am full of them today, so you're welcome. Stuffed zucchini boats. Now, I know summer just passed, and finding those zucchinis might become a challenge, but if you do find them, you must make this dish. Technically, zucchini is a fruit because it develops from the flower of the plant, but most recipes treat it as a vegetable. Thanks to its mild flavor, zucchini is extremely versatile and can be used in savory and sweet recipes alike. Many zucchini recipes are Italian in origin, likely because zucchini originated in Italy in the 1800s and was introduced to the United States by Italian immigrants about 100 years later. This recipe for stuffed zucchini boats is no exception, as it features marinara sauce, mozzarella, and store-bought Italian seasoning, which is a blend of oregano, basil, garlic, onion, marjoram, and rosemary. These little boats were loaded with ground beef, onions, garlic, and sometimes a little rice, all topped with cheese or breadcrumbs and baked until bubbly and golden. The best part? You could eat the boat. No plates are required. Just scoop out the middle, fill it with seasoned beefy goodness, and you've got yourself a complete meal. It's packed with vitamins, and 1 cup of zucchini has only 33 calories, leaving plenty of room for all that cheesy goodness on top. So don't worry about the calories and dig in. Beef empanadas. The ground beef filling was flavored with spices like cumin, paprika, and garlic, all tucked inside a flaky, golden crust. They are the ultimate in customizable comfort food. You can add olives, hard-boiled eggs, or even a spicy kick if that's your thing. The filling would be scooped into circles of dough, crimped shut, and baked or fried until crispy and warm. Empanadas are first cited to be from Portugal and Galicia, Spain. Empanada comes from empanar, which means to wrap or coat in bread in Spanish. The earliest mention of empanadas by name is in a 1520s cookbook in Catalan. The original empanadas resembled pies that were sliced into single pieces, but the basic concept has been the same ever since. In Argentinian history, the empanada was once known as the working man's meal because it contained a full meal that was easy to carry to work. However, empanadas have stayed pretty true to their roots. So long as you get a crispy and flaky pastry stuffed with hearty fillings, you have yourself a great example of this Latin American favorite. Cheeseburger Casserole. Imagine your favorite cheeseburger, but without the bun and in casserole form. Grandma figured out that you could take all the elements of a cheeseburger, ground beef, cheese, ketchup, mustard, pickles, and even some noodles for good measure, and turn it into a dish that could feed the whole family. The result? Cheeseburger Casserole, a cheesy, beefy bake that makes dinner time easy and delicious. The preparation is quite simple. Brown the beef with onions, mix in some secret sauce, usually ketchup and mustard, and then layer it with pasta or rice, all topped with melted cheddar. It was like the best part of a burger, except without all the fuss of grilling and assembling. Cheeseburger casserole is often called a retro dish because it became popular in the 1950s when casseroles were all the rage in American kitchens. It's still a favorite because of its simplicity and that comforting, familiar cheeseburger taste. While on the topic of casseroles, we can't forget the beef enchilada casserole. Enchilada casserole is layer upon layer of beef, salsa, cheese, beans, and tortilla. Layers of ground beef, tortillas, enchilada sauce, and cheese were baked until everything melded together into one spicy, cheesy masterpiece. Enchiladas date back to the Mayans. Corn was a staple crop at the time, and corn tortillas were common. These were originally called tlaxcali. The Spanish conquistadors changed the name from tlaxcali to tortilla upon their arrival to the Western Hemisphere. The conquistadors documented a feast in which participants served a type of enchilada. Later, the first Mexican cookbook, El Cocinero Mexicano, recorded accounts of this dish. Originally, the dish was an empty corn tortilla dipped in chili sauce. Over time, people stuffed the tortillas with various meats and cheeses, and enchilada became the dish we know and love today. But, no matter how it was served, the accompaniment was a chili sauce. Hence, the Spanish word enchilada came to be, meaning to add chili. Over time, beef enchiladas became a Texas Mexican staple, and Grandma's casserole version made them even easier to serve to a crowd. Ground beef and biscuit bake. This dish is a casserole hybrid. It starts with seasoned ground beef, usually mixed with onions, a creamy sauce, sometimes a little cream of mushroom soup or a secret blend, and then topped with golden, buttery biscuits that puff up perfectly in the oven. It's endlessly customizable. You want veggies in there? Toss in some peas or corn. Want more cheese? Pile it on. It's a retro casserole that graced Grandma's dinner table whenever she needed a quick, filling dish for the family. Imagine a potluck staple where juicy ground beef and savory seasonings, sometimes paired with veggies like peas or corn, are topped with canned biscuits and baked to golden perfection. This dish became popular in the mid-20th century when casseroles, thanks to the invention of convenience foods like canned biscuits and condensed soups, were seen as the height of quick, practical home cooking. Ground beef and biscuit bake are popular to this day, and it's the epitome of budget-friendly meals. Plus, it's great for busy weeknights or casual family gatherings. Beef and rice stuffed tomatoes were Grandma's way of tricking you into eating your vegetables. But honestly, who could complain when those giant, juicy tomatoes were packed with seasoned ground beef, rice, and sometimes a sprinkling of cheese? It's like eating a tiny beefy treasure hidden inside a fresh tomato. I am not a big fan of cooked tomatoes, but this is pure heaven. How can someone resist this ball of greatness packed with flavor? Another fun fact for you. I am full of them today. Stuffed vegetables date back to ancient Rome, where they would stuff anything from olives to squashes with meat and grains. This dish is the perfect blend of savory and fresh. The juicy tomato contrasts with the rich, seasoned beef and rice mixture, making it both light and hearty at the same time. Plus, they look fancy, which is perfect for when you have company over or you just want to feel extra gourmet on a random Tuesday night. Ground beef stroganoff over rice. Ground beef stroganoff over rice is a budget-friendly twist on the classic beef stroganoff. While traditional stroganoff calls for tender beef strips, this version swaps in ground beef, making it quicker and more economical without sacrificing flavor. It's a dish that delivers all the creamy, savory goodness you expect from stroganoff, but with an added touch of simplicity. Start by browning ground beef with onions and garlic, allowing the flavors to meld together. You can also toss in some mushrooms for that signature stroganoff earthiness. Once the beef is browned, a creamy sauce comes into play. Typically a blend of beef broth, sour cream, and maybe a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken things up. The sauce simmers and thickens until it's irresistibly rich. This stroganoff dish is usually served over a bed of fluffy white rice, though some people opt for egg noodles. The rice soaks up all that savory sauce, making each bite a perfect balance of creamy, beefy goodness and starchy comfort. Rice also helps stretch the meal, making it ideal for feeding a crowd without breaking the bank. It's perfect for a quick weeknight dinner, but fancy enough to impress guests if needed. Stroganoff originated in 19th century Russia, where it was made with strips of beef and smetana, which was a type of sour cream. The ground beef version we know today evolved as a quicker, more affordable alternative that became especially popular in American kitchens during the mid-20th century. And to finish off this list of 25 forgotten ground beef foods, let's talk about a classic nostalgic dish called tater tot casserole. Tater tot casserole is a nostalgic dish that brings together the best of all comfort food elements: creamy, cheesy, meaty, and crispy. The dish starts with a base of browned ground beef, which is usually cooked with onions and sometimes seasoned with garlic or other spices. This meaty layer is mixed with a creamy sauce, often made with condensed cream of mushroom or chicken soup, creating a thick, savory mixture. Some versions add a vegetable layer, such as green beans or corn, giving it a pop of color and texture. But if you're more of a meat lover like me, you can skip this part. When all of this is ready, here comes the star of the show: the tater tots. These crispy potato nuggets are arranged neatly on top, covering the entire casserole. As the dish bakes, the tots become golden and crispy, creating a crunchy top layer that contrasts perfectly with the creamy beef mixture underneath. And last fun fact of the day: tater tots were invented in 1953 by the founders of Ore-Ida, who were looking for a way to use leftover potato scraps. Today, they've become a beloved ingredient, especially in casseroles like this one, where their crispy texture adds something special to every bite. I know you must be hungry by now, so don't wait up, get cooking. Comment down below which of these meals are you preparing first, and don't forget to like and subscribe.